Hi, I'm Delisa. I live in Alaska and it is June 18th and I'm going to show you how to make compost tea. I've been putting compost tea on my garden 3 times so far and my garden is doing great. So I just wanted you to know how to make it too. It's actually quite easy to make. So let's talk about what it is and why we use it. So compost tea is made with compost, and compost is decomposed organic matter plus the microbes that have been breaking it down. And so lots of bacteria, some fungi, probably some protozoa and nematodes, but it's mostly bacteria and fungi. So those are in the broken down organic matter, which we call compost. And in order to get the most out of this, you can make it into compost tea. And that process involves putting some compost in a bag so that it doesn't escape, and putting it in some water with an aerator to add oxygen to the water and some food to add nutrition for the microbes so that they can multiply rapidly. And they do multiply rapidly, exponentially actually. So it only takes 24 hours to get a huge concentration of these microbes, which we can then apply to our garden. And these are particularly good for applying as foliar feeding, meaning that you spray it on the leaves and the stems and the flowers and everything, as opposed to pouring it in the soil. Because when the microbes are reproducing very, very rapidly under these wonderful conditions, they make a sticky substance which makes them stick to the leaves, and it protects them from diseases and pests and everything. And I've seen evidence of that already in my garden. It also just adds to the microbiome of the plant, and some of this is going to drip down into the soil as well. But it's an easy thing to do as long as you've got some very simple equipment, which I'm going to show you, and some good quality compost. You do need to have some good quality compost because that is where you get the microbes that are then going to begin to multiply very, very rapidly under these very special conditions. So now I'm going to show you the components of the compost brewing system. So I purchased a compost tea kit from a company called Tea Lab, Tealab, online. It's very reasonable. And I use my own 5-gallon bucket, and then they sent me the other component parts. So I just make, and I can make enough for our whole big garden with one 5-gallon bucket's worth. So let's look at the parts. So I'm going to fill this bucket with water, and then I need to provide oxygen to the water. And so this is a little PVC pipe that's been curled around, and it has holes in it to let air through it. So when this is down in the bottom of the bucket, then the water is going to bubble up from the air is going to bubble up from that in the bottom, and I'll show you how it looks in the end, but it's going to look like a big rolling boil on top. So it's got a little tube here that goes to the pump, and I'm going to plug it in to the outlet. So another important part is, what do I do with the compost? I'm going to fill this little bag. This is a fine mesh bag, about like a nylon stocking. So if you want to make your own and you don't buy it with the bag, you can use a nylon stocking. So I'm going to fill this about half full, and then I'll show you myself doing it. And then I'm going to submerge this in the water so that the water can be cycling through the bag. And this kit also came with some instructions and some recipes. And I'm using, just a few of these ideas. I took a wonderful course called the Soil Food Web course. The instructor was Elaine Ingham, who is, she's the guru on the soil food web. So I'm using her suggestions. So we've got the compost in the water bubbling, but then we need one more component, and that's food, because when those bacteria and fungi are reproducing, they need something to eat. So I'm going to add 3 things. I'm going to put in some blackstrap molasses, and you can buy this bulk in a garden supply store. I'm going to use 1/4 cup of this. They really love this. Make sure it's not sulfured molasses. You can use just the regular grocery store kind, like Grandma's or something, but just make sure it is not sulfured and it's blackstrap, because that is what gives it not only the sugar for energy, but also minerals. I'm also going to add a little bit of humic acid, which again, you can get that at a garden supply store. I'm just going to use a teaspoon of that. And that just kind of adds some complex foods to the very simple sugars. That is also going to help the fungi to grow. And then this is some kelp. This is liquid kelp. Again, you can get that at a garden supply store. And I'm just going to put in about a teaspoon of that. So let's get started. I have brought up some water from the lake, and I'm going to fill this up. Oops, spilling it here. That's enough for right now. I'm going to add some more later after I figure out how much room I have, because I don't want this to bubble over. So now I need to get my compost into my compost bag. So I have 2 kinds of compost that I'm going to use. This one is my special compost. This is my worm compost, and it is like super rich, full of wonderful microbes. So I'm going to put in, my recipe says 4 to 6 cups. So I'm going to put in 4 cups of this. And if you haven't learned about worm composting yet, I highly recommend it. I've made some videos of that, and I will be sending out a link to you for that. This is another kind of compost. We actually purchased this from a commercial compost place here in the Wasilla area, and I'm going to add 2 cups of this. And the reason why I'm adding this is because this compost was made outside with different ingredients than the ingredients in my worm compost. And that means that there's going to be some different microbes in it, which means more diversity. And diversity is always good. So if you have 2 kinds of compost in here, that's not necessary. If you don't, that's totally okay. But since I do have access to both of those, that's a good thing, because that will give me more biodiversity, and more biodiversity is always a good thing. So to use this, you just roll this over, and it comes with a way to latch it. So that's my bag of compost. I'm going to submerge this in the water. And I have a way to hang this up right here. This all was part of the kit, which is handy. So, you can certainly make a kit like this yourself, but this wasn't very expensive. It was only $80. And now I'm going to put my food in. I'm going to put in 1/4 cup of tea. I'm sorry, 1/4 cup of molasses. So it's going to turn this dark. And I'm putting in a teaspoon of the humic acid and a teaspoon of the kelp. I don't think you have to be totally precise with this at all. It's very dark. And humic acid is a complex food that is found naturally in humus. And of course, humus is broken down organic matter. So if you go out into your woods and you find, just scrape off some of the leaves and organic debris, you're going to find some rich brown soil. That's humus. And if you pour water through the humus, it will come out as humic acid, so you can make your own. It's not really making it, you're just extracting it. Okay, and now this is kelp, liquefied kelp, which is again a complex food. And when I say complex, I mean that it's good for the microbes that break down more complicated things instead of just simple sugars. So in other words, it's good for the fungi. And then once you have lots of bacteria and fungi, then that starts to feed the little bit bigger microbes called protozoa. But they don't multiply so rapidly, so we might not see a lot of those, but we are going to see tons of bacteria. So now we've got the food in here. We've got the compost in the bag. Now I'm going to fill this a little more so that it's up to about the 4-gallon mark. And one thing I've discovered is that this is going to float to the top a little bit when I turn it on, and I don't want that to happen. So Charlie made me a little solution to it. So I've just got a little plastic thing that's going to sit over the top of the round pipe, and I'm going to put these rocks on there. Okay, so my bag of compost is all wet and the microbes are starting to come out. So now I'm going to plug it in. And you're going to see it makes a big rolling boil. That's all we have to do. And now nature does the rest. So I'm going to let this bubble. I'm just going to let it happen out here on the deck, and it's about probably 65 degrees. So that'll be a very nice temperature for them to start multiplying. And in about 24 hours, there is going to be a huge explosion of growth that has been happening. So I'll just take the bag out, and we will use the liquid to spray on all the garden plants. We're going to dilute this liquid with water, 1-to-1, and this will be enough to cover our entire garden and yard and all the berry bushes and flowers and everything. So that's all there is to it. It does wonders for your garden, and the reason I know it works is because I've used it for, I've put it on 3 times, and I've looked at this under the microscope, and it's unbelievable how many microbes there are after it's had a chance to bubble for this long. So I might make another video showing you that. So this is a simple process. All you really need is the kit and some compost, which you could buy someplace, and you can make your own. Now, the reason why you might want to make your own is because this is full of life, and you need to be able to use it up within about 24 hours or even less. Because once I stop the bubbling and let it just sit there, it's not going to continue to be alive. And so if you don't use it within, I'd say 24 hours would be sort of a max, maybe 6 hours would be better, then you're going to lose a lot of the life that was in it. And so if you see something at the garden supply store in a bottle and it says compost tea, I wouldn't waste my money, because it's not going to have the life in it that this is going to have. It can't. This is an aerobic process. It requires oxygen. So if you make it yourself, you know it's fresh. If you don't make it yourself, you can get it from somebody else who does make it, because there are people who do. And you can still grow a garden without it, but this really, really helps. So that's all there is to it. You might notice the shirt that I've got on that says, "Into the garden I go to lose my mind and find my soul." So that's a pretty good philosophy of life.